New beginning.
Welcome to the Grief Dreams podcast. My name is Sean Ram alongside Dr. Joshua Black. Dr. Black, how are you today?
I'm good, Sean. I can't wait to talk to this next guest. Hopefully, you can give me some tips as we move forward in this life.
Yeah, it's another really cool, interesting individual that we get to speak to. And let me tell you about him. His name is Jonathon Aslay, and he is a midlife dating and relationship coach. He helps women recognize and distinguish the difference between men who are emotionally unavailable from those who are truly ready for love. He is also the author of 4 books: Unlocking the Male Mind, Finding Love Online, Why Men Pull Away, 3 Ways to Keep Him Close, and the new book, What the Heck is Self-Love Anyways? So without further ado, you can find more on his website, which is jonathanaslay.com. And here we go. Here's Jonathon. Welcome to the program.
Well, thank you both for having me. I'm so excited to be sharing with both of you today and your audience.
Yeah, it's so interesting when I read your bio, and you had so many different things when I looked at your webpage and stuff too that have come up, and it's so interesting the career choice you chose, because you don't really hear it that often, that someone sort of focuses all their energy to basically helping others find love and really distinguishing what love is. And then with your book that probably has a lot of tips in it too. So could you go back to sort of tell us like what made you go this? I don't think you went to school, did you? I don't think there was a class in university that said how to be a midlife dating coach.
No. Well, thank you. And I think it happens by default for most of us. And I have a few contemporaries, both men and women, but in particular men who have chosen down this career path. My journey started, well, let me even backtrack. I'm of the baby boom generation, and I was programmed to, after high school, go to college, after college, get a job, after getting a job or career, meet a girl, get married, buy a house, start a family. And I had that programming in me. And I followed it to a T, and it didn't make me any happier. I wasn't overly happy with my career, and I made a choice at a very young age with a person who's a fantastic person, but ultimately we weren't right for each other. And in 2005, I had 2 dramatic things happen. My wife, or ex-wife now, and I decided to split. And literally in the same month, the company I'd worked for, and I spent 20 years in the insurance business, the company I worked for decided to lay me off. And I was making $250,000 a year. So to lose a substantial job like that, and so not only was I losing my professional identity, I was also going through what can be sometimes one of the most traumatic events in a person's life. And I began online dating. At first, literally I moved out of the house, and the first thing I did was go online, because I thought, oh, this is great, because online was so brand new, back in 2005, 2006. Or at least it felt brand new. You could literally plug exactly what you want, and someone would magically appear. And I did that, and I'll never forget. I had my first date was in February of 2005. Met a great gal, had a fun time, but something wasn't right. And then a few days later, I met another person, nice person, fun date, something wasn't right. And this was happening over and over again. And in 1 year, I had 100 internet dates. And I realized that the something wasn't right was me. I was already miserable going through the elements of divorce, and was unhappy because professionally my life was collapsing. And that was really an awakening to a journey that really started to change my life, because then I began to look at personal development and self-help as a daily practice, because I was so unhappy and miserable. But at the same time, I'm communicating with all these women online, and they're asking me for, we're just talking to one another. I was literally addicted to talking to women every single night. And I was having 4 or 5 hour conversations every single night. And they were then asking me advice. I wasn't even dating them. We were just developing friendships. And they asked me how to help them improve their profile. And I just gave them perspective. And all of a sudden, my career was born.
Wow, that's so interesting. You're right. Like, it's not something that you consciously chose. It's like people wanted help and you were there. I think it's fascinating how you were able to step back and realize something was off about you, not that
Yeah.
all the women were something wrong was with them. And I think it takes a lot of courage to look at your own life and to see your own flaws, because I don't see that a lot in a lot of people I meet. It's a lot of projection going on, a lot of people judging other people, and a lot of people don't take ownership for who they are in the interaction. So I'm guessing that's probably where you start off with a lot of people when it comes to dating, right? Is figuring out who they are and where they lack in, I guess, self-love.
That's a great point, and thank you for recognizing that. I felt as though you know the old phrase, "What's the definition of insanity?" Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, and that's what it felt like after 100 dates. I'm like, something's not right. It's time to look in the mirror, and if I can encourage anyone who's listening to this, or and this is my message out in the world, is to recognize that oftentimes when we point the finger to the outside world being the problem, or maybe our past relationship or our parents and such, and certainly a lot of things can influence how we are as individuals. That finger being pointed, we have to remember, we can look at our hand and go, well, there's 3 fingers pointing back at me. And that's what I believe self-awareness is to recognize that we individually are the cause of our experiences. It may not feel that way. It may feel like outside forces are causing what's happening in our life. But the minute a person recognizes that the individual is the cause of their experiences, that, I believe, is the first step to awareness.
Jonathan, what was it in you that you saw that maybe wasn't working, or that you needed to kind of reevaluate and do some self-help and introspective looking into kind of what that dynamic was for you? What was it that made you want to reevaluate?
Thank you. You know what came to mind as you asked that question was an experience I had while dating, where I had a date with a woman. I think it was the day after New Year's, so it was January 2nd, and it was an evening. And for whatever reason, we met, on this date, but I hadn't eaten anything the entire day. For whatever reason, I don't typically eat breakfast. I missed lunch. I didn't have dinner. And the reason why I'm pointing this out is we went out for drinks, and immediately I got drunk. And what ended up happening during the date ended up being a blur. And what happened the next morning when I reached out to her, kind of wanting to connect with her, she shared with me my belligerent behavior. And in that moment, I was completely embarrassed. And I had a choice, because at first because I felt like I was being attacked. And my first reaction was, defending myself. And then I go, and then I looked within and I said, you know what, you were really most likely out of line. And that caused me to go, I want to show up in a different way going forward in my life. I want to show up with more integrity, more authenticity, more transparency. And keep in mind, I've been reading books like The 4 Agreements and Untethered Soul and Return to Love that were all, helped create this awareness. But it wasn't until I had that particular humbling event that really helped me become aware that I'm the instigator of what's happening. And I created that situation, even though I was being neglected, and I did it by not eating, and then drinking thereafter. So that was a pivotal moment for me.
That's so interesting. Yeah, it's cool to see that, to look back, and I'm guessing see and reflect on how far you've come now. What was your coping style prior to that? Because I'm guessing you're really about talking things through now. just the way I'm hearing you. How did you cope with life prior to maybe like what you figured out along the way to how to cope with either relationship issues or any other issues that come up in your life?
Yeah, thank you. After my divorce and losing my job, my life started to take a tailspin. And interesting enough, the dating was like self-medication in a way. It was like a drug to me. I was really addicted to the online dating high of that first meeting. I was very much a serial dater. I mean, that's how you get 100 dates in. And by the way, I had a lot more dates even after that. From 2005, and then what happened in 2008, and I'm bringing this up in particular, is that I think most everyone will remember the market crash of 2008, 2009. And I suffered deeply. I got wiped out, and I got wiped out by a total of a 7-figure wipeout. And I was in my mid 40s. I had one point lived in a $2 million home. When I was married, we sold our house. That's how I was able to have that kind of asset. And I was living at the beach, and I was kind of day trading for a while. I wasn't working in the insurance world anymore, doing my dating, online dating as my one addiction. When I financially got wiped out, my coping was not only online dating, it was drugs and alcohol. I literally was doing cocaine on a daily basis just to get by. And those things, drinking, dating, and drugs, was how I coped. It was how I got by each day. And it wasn't until 2010 that I really started to turn things around. And by the way, and I had to move in with my mom and dad at age 45. And they lived in a retirement community. So my parents were retired, living in a retirement community, and I'm this tiny. And by the way, to come from a multi-million-dollar house to moving in with your mom and dad, I mean, it's demoralizing.
Yes.
And yet I was still dating.
Was there a lot of potential dating candidates at the retirement home? I imagine a lot of single ladies available.
There probably were. I didn't go down that path, but I was also there was a facade of myself, because I knew in my core I was going to continually get rejected on some level. And what interestingly happened was, it wasn't until I met a woman. And this was shortly after beginning my dating coaching business of helping women. I actually started to promote myself professionally online, helping women with online dating profiles and helping them understand men in the process. And I built up a little bit of brand awareness through Facebook. Then I met a woman through Facebook and eventually through a dating site. And she's a doctor. She had her own television show. We had some mutual friends. We went on a date and we had a great time. And I'm thinking she's going to reject me. And we went on a second date. And why this is so pivotal is, during our second date, I guess I'd been talking about my parents a lot. And she goes, "Do you live with your parents?" And guys, I was the deer in the headlights. Like, I could either lie, which would be out of integrity, and I'm in great fear of being rejected. And I told her yes. And interestingly enough, she didn't reject me in that moment, but we weren't in a relationship or anything. But I'd asked her, "Do you want to get together a few nights later to go to a movie?" And she didn't say no. And every time I kept asking her to do something, she didn't say no. Now, just so you guys know, she never had any intention of dating me. I just was being persistent on hanging out with her, that we eventually formed a relationship. And why that was so pivotal for me was, I was at the lowest point of my life, and yet someone accepted me and loved me, even in my shame, even in my embarrassment. And it was an act of love on her part, and it was a door opening to my own self-love. Because I am not, I didn't have to stick to this story that I have to be a provider, protector to be in relationship.
Yeah, that's a very interesting statement and series of statements because you look at what online dating is, it's a very superficial layer of what a person is. And so
Yeah,
everybody, just like Facebook is, everybody's kind of showing their best. And so
yeah,
you went through a lot of changes in your life, being divorced and losing a lot of money and a job and a lot of changes. So I can imagine your identity is kind of going through a lot of changes and you're probably feeling down and you probably
yeah,
maybe don't have the self-love that you kind of, you're not at your best and feeling good
yeah,
about even your embarrassments, instead you're kind of uh, hiding them away because, you're meeting people who are doctors and whatever, and they're perfect. So you want to be at your best.
yeah.
But that's, and then that's fascinating because it seems like you kind of, like you described, you understood that it was like love, your own self love that kind of needed to kind of happen, where you're not embarrassed about living with your parents and you just, who you are as a person.
Thank you. It was an interesting dynamic because on some level, I don't want to give all the power away to her because of her acceptance. It was she actually what she did best was mirror to me what she already saw inside of me. And 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 in that mirroring, I got to be able to go, you know what, I am worthy.
Mm.
And so while there's a little bit of whether it's the chicken or the egg, whatnot, there was an element where I I got to see that this is really about me because but one of the beautiful things she did is she never fed into my fears, but she also didn't enable me, which a lot of people do. So they can see, because for example, a lot of women could see a man, wow, he's down on his luck, and I see potential in him, and they'll enable that man in some way. And by the way, women are great at seeing potential within men. I mean, that's like one of their greatest gifts, right? She saw my potential, but she never enabled me. She kept pushing me and challenging me. Now, thankfully, we were kind of in the same profession because she was a relationship therapist. And we worked well together, helping each other, support each other in our dreams of helping people form healthy, happy relationships. And it took my own self love, if you will, my what's not self love, my self confidence, my self esteem, my self reliance. It's all those pieces of self was beginning to emerge because I started to believe in myself. And I chose not to believe in the old story, I'm worthless. I'm worth something. And that was the beginning catalyst.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating how I think even in our culture we put so much praise on those who have a lot of money, and so it's like those who are the best people, or those who people who say they love themselves the most, they have this a lot of money or they have a lot of security, so they feel like almost that they have it all. But I love what you're talking about is that, you got all that taken away and it showed what was underneath it all. Because you didn't change because of the financial crash. You're like that with the money. You just didn't really fully understand it or know it at that time. And so for it to be taken away and for you to see this side of yourself and then pursue something greater, I think is like the biggest lesson of this all is like sometimes when the world strips you of these things or things that we feel that make us are better in this world or make us feel more
Yeah.
loved, we get to see the truth of how we see ourselves in the mirror without all that. And I think that's what I'm really impressed with, that you saw that, you could see that, and you had someone around to show you that it's okay. Like that's okay to be living with your parents or to be in this struggle because this is life. And
Yeah.
this is why we talk about this stuff on the podcast, because a lot of people just don't talk about this stuff in general. They sort of avoid it, as you're saying, in Facebook and stuff. So, like great for you to learn that, but then move forward and try to help others. And so could you talk a little bit about how you engage people finding new relationships after a divorce or even after a death?
Yeah, I want to I want to piggyback on something you said because, and I think this will lead into this question, is that I feel as though on some level, we all have what I call a humbling event, something that humbles us. And because, from birth, we start off as love, and then we're conditioned by society, we're conditioned by our parents, we're conditioned on so many levels to, to have walls and layers and barriers between ourselves and love, and ego comes in here. And so in my particular case, I had this big humbling event, which created a lot of micro humbling events, like I told you about, drinking too much on that date. And so these humbling events were the catalyst to my awareness. And whether it's loss of a relationship, loss of a job, maybe even a loss of a loved one or whatever, those are opportunities to explore a deeper layer of awareness within oneself. And I'd like to think of an opportunity to shift to love. And so one of the messages that what's interesting, when you shared my bio, I realized I have to rewrite my bio because I've written 3 other books that were related to dating and relationships that I almost want to throw away because, and I'm sharing this with you because at first when I started to teach, when I became a dating coach, I was coming at it from a place of ego and my own wounds. And so a lot of the content was coming from a wounded place. And I was giving advice from that place. It was really the world according to Jonathon. And I'm owning this now. I'm really now, it's because someone was reading, I was doing an interview recently, someone was reading some chapters of my book, and I kept saying, well, I have a new perspective on that, which really means I don't agree with what I said before.
Do you have an example that you can give us?
Yeah. So I wrote a book called Understand Men Now, The Relationships Men Commit to and Why, which is also known as Unlocking the Male Mind. And in one of the chapters, I recommended to the reader that men should be putting out 3 times more effort than a woman in the initial stages of dating. In other words, for every 3 times he sends a text message, you should send a text message. And because this concept that men have to work for it and men have to earn it. And what I realized is that's a one-sided way of looking at it, because a really healthy relationship is 2 people showing up on the 50-yard line, equally giving effort. Now, effort could look different. It doesn't have to mirror each other, but it's about equally putting effort. But in this book, I gave advice that was really kind of slanted that men are supposed to do more. And that's a false belief. That was a false belief on my part at that time. Now, whether 50-50 effort is a more accurate belief, I don't know, but I truly believe that a healthy relationship is stemmed by mutual effort. So a lot of dating rhetoric I gave in the past was based on ego way of dating and not a more healthier way of dating, which really led me to wanting to write the book about self-love. This book was birthed from 2 reasons. One, then the book is called What the Heck is Self-Love Anyway? It was birthed because I felt like a lot of dating advice and a lot of relationship advice was surface-based. In other words, it was based on, you complete me kind of thing, like we need another person to fulfill our happiness, when it actually starts within. And it was also birthed because I had lost my 19-year-old son. It was in July of 2018. And through that experience, it shifted a lot inside of me to want to really understand love a lot deeper, both for myself and others. And so I began writing about the concept of self-love and loving others. And within 2 months of his passing, I actually began the writing of the book, and I published it 9 months to the day of when he passed away. Because I'm a firm believer that love is the antidote to everything, and it starts from within.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about the loss of your son. Before we get there, I just wanted to ask one more thing about your books and your knowledge on what you've obviously your life and what you've written about. We've
Yeah.
changed a lot. Society's changed a lot over the last, even since 2006. Things are really moving at a faster pace in terms of
Yeah.
progression and uh, men and women and equal rights, and really changing the narrative around what it's like to treat women with respect and vice versa. And especially coming from a baby boomer generation, you get to see all this and see it kind of play out. There's also a level of aspect, and as a man, I'd love to get your opinion on this. When you hear about situations like men who turn to hating women, are being malicious or violent or whatever, and you come across those situations, like for instance, the incel groups. What is it? What do you see in that? And what the feedback you're getting from women based off of maybe those situations?
So that's a great question. I think, men today, and we have to kind of let me just share, because I work with what's the over 40 crowd. I call it midlife, which is after baby making or before baby making years and before retirement kind of thing. I want to differentiate between the 20-year-old and the 40-year-old out there who's let's in the dating realm. And why I'm differentiating the two is, when you're in your 20s, you're driven by testosterone. You're driven by, at least men in particular, are driven by testosterone, very goal oriented. I'm going to conquer the world. And then by the time you hit your 40s, you might have gone through a marriage, you might have gone through a number of relationships, and you might have had a humbling event or two happen in your life. Many people there's a reason why the term midlife crisis came about, because it's that shift in asking oneself, who am I? And what begins to happen at this age oftentimes is many of our childhood wounds and of our past experiences start to unfold, start to surface. A lot of inner turmoil begins to surface, and men's behavior can seem wonky to women in the relationship realm, because many men are going through a lot of inner turmoil, inner uncertainty, doubts in their lives. They might start to have physical changes, testosterone levels decrease, estrogen levels increase. And so their behavior might not seem very kind, gentle, altruistic, or whatnot. And that's one of the things I've observed for them in the male population. So I tell women, most men are good people. They're just bad at the dating process. They're just, and by the way, women can be equally as bad. So this isn't a men against women kind of thing. I'm just observing it in this context. Is that both men and women struggle to really create connection with one another. And that's the conversation that I talk into to that demographic, is understanding that men and women are just human beings trying to do the best they can. And they might struggle at it because they might be going through a lot of pain on the inside.
Yeah, and that goes back to when you have that, like you said, when you have that humbling moment,
Yeah.
how do you react? And example came to my head is, in the past I've occasionally had back injuries, and it's during those times when I have an injury, I'm laid out, can't move, not doing much, is when when that's the humbling moment for me, because it makes me
Yeah.
humble and appreciate health, appreciate when my body is physically able to do that. But if I don't have, like, if I don't have something to appreciate, that can just kind of sit and fester. And I think
Yeah.
maybe for some guys, if they haven't had a positive experience with a woman or have dated someone that's a positive experience, and when they're going through lulls or not meeting people, if they don't, during that humbling moment, if they don't have something to look back and say, well, I do appreciate when I was able to have, let's say, love with a woman or whatever, then I think that can fester and turn into something really negative, and that can really add to that type of hatred towards others and people. And then
Yeah.
it can just lash out, online, or if you meet one or two women and all of a sudden you're, well, I'm getting rejected. Well, that just goes back to kind of, that type of feeling that you got. And I think that sometimes, that's obviously a problem. And I think, obviously self-love, I think is probably connected a lot to these type of situations.
Oh, you are so right, spot on right there. There's an element where if we've had, for lack of a better word, a humbling event, or you might have been rejected on a date, and it happens once or twice, some people turn to becoming jaded or bitter. And in those moments, or or their experiences going forward, a lot of times it will come out in bad behavior. Even remember I shared earlier the way I kind of taught my dating advice came from my wound. And it wasn't the healthiest advice I could have given at that time. It took a lot of what I call micro humbling events, a lot of micro things. And I will say it took the love of a person to recognize in me that helped me shift. And so it's one of the reasons why I'm a huge advocate for a compassionate way to approach the process, both for oneself and others, because we don't know someone else's journey. That person that maybe had been hurt so many times might have become bitter and jaded when all they're really thirsty for is someone to love them. Now, I'm not here to even remotely suggest you should accept bad behavior. I'm an absolute believer in boundaries. So for that guy who's bitter and jaded, all he really wants is to feel loved. Doesn't mean that you should be in relationship with them, but we can always send energetic love to the person who's hurting. And send a lot of love to ourselves for making the next choice, hopefully for someone who truly at least isn't bitter or jaded or down on, that men or women, because a lot of both men and women can equally be jaded of the opposite sex. It's loving the process. It's loving people. It's when we come from a place of loving that things will begin to shift.
Absolutely. And one last thing, and I also think it's realistic expectations, because I've met some men who, they come up to me and they say, what friends, and they're like, what how do I do this? How do I meet women? I'm having a hard time. And when I tell them when I ask them what kind of woman they're looking for, it's usually kind of like mostly based off looks, and mostly on the higher end of really, let's say if you had a scale to 10, let's say nines and tens. And first of all, I think from the get-go that's kind of wrong, because you're setting yourself up, because you're already looking at something that's kind of in the rarity anyways. And then when you go out and reach out to those women who are, I guess, looking like how you want them to look at, and they reject you, well, then you say, well, all women are kind of rejecting me. How do you navigate through that if you do talk to men and say, well, what are your expectations?
That's a great question, because our ego, and for the men listening and the women listening to this, men are visual creatures. We are driven by looks, and women are no different as well. Women, I think, have a little bit more, are come from the heart a little differently, and we come from the eyes, so to speak. I think for them, the thing about expectations is the word expect. The thing is, if we're looking at a partner based solely on looks as our belief that they are maybe quality, or have a good heart, or aren't wounded, or that sort of thing. In other words, remember when you said earlier about there's the perception about when people have money, they seem to have their life together. Well, we know that's not true, given how many celebrities commit suicide. So it's looks doesn't make a person. And so for that man who's solely looking based on looks, I invite you to go, you know what, there's a whole person there that's beyond the looks. And what I think is most important is a person's heart and soul, and coming from a place of loving, recognizing that we all have a personality and our personalities may not mesh with one another, but come from a place of love and not from a place of looks. I know that sounds very woo-woo, but I'm just putting it out there, and just put that in your consciousness and try it on for size.
Yeah, no, I like that. And like the other reality too is beauty fades. You know, as people age, like that all fades away, and you're left with who the person is underneath it all. And that's who you want to be with if you're looking for a long-term relationship. That's the thing that, you know, brings out the best in you, is who the person is, not how they look. So, you know,
I have something. Can I share something about that?
Yeah.
It just relates to my mom and dad. So my parents were married 66 years before my mother passed away, and my dad, devastatingly handsome. My mom, a debutante. You know, my dad was a World War II commander of a destroyer in the Navy and stuff like that. So they look like a perfect couple. And after I think my sister was born, my mother put on 200 pounds. I think at one point she was 300 pounds. And at age 60, my dad's like Sean Connery handsome and my mom's overweight. And years later, I asked my dad, I go, you know, did you ever cheat on mom? And I felt like he was giving, his answer was very sincere. Because I said, did you ever cheat on my mom because she got heavy? And he goes, you know what? I always look at your mom like I first saw her. And even though he can be considered handsome out in the world, and she's overweight and unattractive, what he was really saying is, I look at your mom's heart. That's what matters most to me. And he was that way until the day she passed away. And so, like what you said, looks do fade, but a heart, beautiful heart remains constant, in my opinion.
Did your dad ever end up dating after your mom died?
He's 90. This just happened last year, and he's 94. And so I hope to God he doesn't.
Never too late. Never too late.
No. Well, but he does flirt with all the women at the assisted living facility. So let me just say that.
It's the spot, I hear. And I think what you're saying is right. Look, people have layers and they have sides to them, and you really have to incorporate all of them because, like you said, looks are one aspect, fine, but there's a person's mind and their heart and, the things they talk about and the things you have connected with together. And when you enter into a relationship and you go through years with the person, if it's just physical or looks, those all fade. They definitely do. But the other ones actually grow. So I think ultimately, and I think a lot of these are, like you said before, they kind of stem from how you grow up and what your expectations are for life. Like, oh, I want a car, I want a good job, I want a really, trophy wife, I want this, and this is how my life's going to be. And I think that having those, firmly set in your mind can actually set you up for rejection, because especially in 2019, the dating world's not like that necessarily. Not to say that some people don't seek that and don't end up finding what they find, but I think for the most part, when you look at the trends and you're meeting new people, it's better for you to kind of keep an open mind and say, okay, well, who I am, who is this person? Let me try to get to know all aspects of them.
Yeah, you nailed it right there. And expectations oftentimes get the better of us, and which is why I'm a huge proponent of discussing what I call alignment. And that is choosing people who are aligned in your values, choosing people who are aligned in your lifestyle, choosing people that are aligned in your emotional maturity. And then when you add chemistry to the mix, then you have the makings for a potentially great relationship. Versus our dating process today is very attraction chemistry based, which which I also believe is ego based, which is expectation based, versus really coming at it from a more purposeful way of going, hey, do we share the same values with one another? Because a lot of people don't. I mean, United States, we're a very divided country, and we can look at politics and religion as being an example of that. So first, do we kind of share the same values? And I don't mean the value of trust, integrity, and honesty. I mean the deeper values. And then, are our lifestyles compatible with one another? There are a lot of people that date that lifestyles are so incompatible with one another, and they're waiting for the other person to make a change in their life. And the real biggest issue in dating and relationships today centers around emotional maturity. And the reality is, vast numbers of human beings don't have the emotional maturity to be in a relationship because they haven't learned how to communicate their thoughts and feelings effectively. They haven't learned how to have conflict resolution in a harmonious way, or at least a beneficial way to the outcome of the bigger picture, which is the relationship itself. And a relationship is a separate entity. And this is where a lot of people get mixed up, because they're thinking there's you and a me. No, the relationship is a whole separate entity.
Yeah, and I can see too how relationships may end just due to a passing of someone. I know after a child's death, it is common for relationships to end, just because it's very hard to deal with those emotions while maintaining that relationship. There's a lot of work that goes into building something strong, and communication, as you're saying, is one of the most important things to maintain the relationship. I'm curious, you mentioned, so your mom died and then your son died, and they both died in the same year. Is that right?
7 months apart. Yeah.
Wow. So could you talk about that journey? And I know like it helped you write that book, but that's a lot of loss from two important people in your life.
Well, technically almost 3. So my mother passed away in November of 2017, and my mother, it was very quick. She went in the hospital, and 3 weeks later she was gone. And in that experience, my mother represented, one half of the rock of my existence. My mother and father were the rocks, if you will. I got a chance to say goodbye, and I also knew that, what, she was 88 years old. She lived she will openly admit that she lived a very blessed life. And so it was the natural timing of things. So while I mourned it, I also looked at it as like, hey, she lived a great life, and I got a chance to say goodbye. And then bam, 7 months later, I lose my son to an accident. And I didn't get a chance to say goodbye. It came out of left field. It was, it doesn't go with the natural order of things. And in that moment, every fear I ever experienced, because when both my boys were born, my greatest fear would be something happened to them. And I spent 19 years, he was 19 years old when he passed away, but between him and his brother, 20 plus years, worrying about something happen, and then bam, it happened. And in that experience, because my mother, I kind of accepted it, just because it was the natural order of things. In this moment, it was so out of the blue, and I made a conscious choice to go, I'm going to grieve with love. I don't know where it came from, but I said, I'm going to grieve with love. And what that means is I'm going to love myself. I'm going to find a way to embrace this experience from a place of love, of acceptance. And so, and I don't know really, I may not be articulating this well, guys. So, please forgive me, but all I remembered was, how am I just going to love in this process, rather than choosing fear and anger? And not that I haven't felt, anger, depression, some of those denial, all those experiences that they say you go through in the stages of grief. But I said, I'm just going to grieve with love. And so the first thing I did was go, he may not be here on a physical realm, but he's here on a spiritual realm. And I made a commitment to believe that and to embrace that. And interestingly enough, on the day after he passed away, I was walking to my place, and these yellow butterflies, or a yellow butterfly just went past me. And then the next day, a yellow butterfly kept following me. Now, I never noticed butterflies where I live, for the 5 years prior, but all of a sudden this yellow butterfly was following me. And I live on the third story of my condo complex. And 2 days later, this yellow butterfly was floating by my place. And I said, that's my son letting me know he's okay. And whether that's true or not, that's what I believe. And so I felt as though I was starting to get all these signs that he was here. He was here. And I can say that while I've gone through pain and hurt and missing him and everything, I also embraced another possibility that he's not here in the mortal form, but he's definitely here in a spiritual form. And that's allowed me to navigate this with a lot more compassion for myself and compassion for him as well.
Yeah, a lot of people sort of say that about, their loved ones being around them, and that gives them a lot of comfort. Were you spiritual before he died, or was that something you took up after his death?
Interestingly enough, to me, the word spirituality means a discovery of self. And I would say I had begun a journey of self-discovery. And interestingly enough, I had just started to do a daily study group in A Course in Miracles, just, probably a couple months prior. And I was doing a daily, teleconference every morning with a group of people. And we had just been talking about death literally weeks before. I was like, wow, was I being prepared? I didn't know it at the time, but I was being prepared for this because I allowed myself to shift my perspective around death. And what was interesting, my son had had a couple seizures prior to him passing, and I had to experience worry, and I made a choice I kind of said, let go of worry. Okay, whatever's meant to happen is meant to happen. And then it happened. And I'm like, because all of my worry wasn't going to change his outcome. His outcome was going to happen. But I began this practice prior, but it's become amplified since his passing. And when I say the word spiritual, I don't mean the words religious, and I don't necessarily mean it woo-woo. I just look at spirituality as a journey of self-discovery. To a different way of looking at things. Let me just say that too.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. I feel that as well. I'm just thinking back when you said that when your son was growing up, that you would always worry about him, and it made me really think, and I felt that because I myself don't have any children, but when I'm around, let's say my brother and my nephew, you can kind of put your shoes into their shoes and say, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I can understand that there's, as a parent, you love someone so much, and it's a part of your life, and you care deeply for them, for their safety. I get a bit of a taste of that with my dog, and I've mentioned that before.
Yeah.
He's that's my son, and I used to a lot more have these kind of thoughts about his death, and then that would kind of scare me and put me in a state of fear, and and then I can just imagine now that what it's like with children, and your own, having your son and die before you, and going through that with all the emotions, must have been difficult as well. And again, when we talk about faith, it's not necessarily religion, but it's still, it's a chance that you take. But I think that it seems like it's the more positive option because there's hope that's attached to it as well. You almost can't have one without the other. So I think that, like,
Yeah.
moving forward in order to grow and continue to live, I think that's an important aspect that you mentioned.
Well, it's interesting because I know one thing my son would want for me. He would never want me to be sad. And so, like, I know that. And so I had a choice because I could choose to grieve through a lot of pain. I could choose to, and by the way, I don't mean any disrespect to anyone listening that has suffered loss and is feeling pain. Um, I just know he would never want me to suffer, you know, for a long period of time. I know he wouldn't want me to suffer one day. And so I feel like, I do miss him. And there are moments where I'm feeling, the loss of him. But I don't have to choose to go down that road on an emotional roller coaster that takes me down the realm of suffering. And if I can encourage, in fact, I'd like to encourage those that are feeling that suffering to know that your loved one would never want you to feel that experience. And to piggyback on, when you're talking about your pet, your dog, however, whether it's a child, a parent, an animal, whatever it is that we care about deeply, when that loss occurs, it's almost like a little death of ourselves. And you were saying before with nieces or nephews, there's this natural element where we want to protect children. We want to protect, there's, I think, an innate desire to protect those that we have raised, if you will. So you raised your dog. There's this natural inclination to want to protect them from harm. And yet, I think it's also important that we recognize that interesting. I had my mother and my son pass away. My mother, natural order of things, 88 years old. You have a dog that lives to be 15, 16, you go, wow, that's like beyond what most animals, it's the natural order of things.
Yeah.
When a child passes away, we say that's not the natural order of things. And yet it is. Children die every day. Elderly people die every day. Pets die every day. Relationships die every day. Loss isn't inevitable. And so, and I'll share, I had a dream from my son that happened several months back. And he said, came to me clear as day. And he said, Dad, first off, be grateful. He goes, I'm in a place of light and love. And I just want you to be grateful for that. So anytime you hear about someone passing, choose gratitude because we're already in the light, is what he said to me in this vision. In other words, he was trying to say, you don't need to suffer. It's okay because you're on your journey doing the things you're supposed to do for your own awareness. I'm already in that place of love. Be happy for me.
Wow, that's beautiful. When you had that dream, were you not in a good place? Like, I'm just really curious or were you like thinking about things and where he was? Because usually when those dreams happen, there's sometimes a reason why they're saying it to the dreamer.
Yeah. So it was a month before that vision. Whether I call it dream or vision, I'm going to use both for this context, but it was the month before. I remember just it was early morning. It was around 4 a.m. I was just in that state of consciousness and unconsciousness. And he came to me in a vision. He says, I'm ready to talk to you. And then a month later was when I had this vision and I was in actually a state, I was in a very sacred space when this happened. And I was doing a deep meditation when this happened. I was in such a meditation that I was kind of crossing between consciousness and unconsciousness when this vision came. So I was actually, and I'd set an intention before I did this meditation. I said, Connor, if you have a message for me, please, share it with me. So, but I was intentionally going to a deep place of, it wasn't like I went to bed sleeping. I went into a deep meditation and then that vision came.
Interesting. So it may not have been a dream per se, because you may not have been asleep.
I was really quasi. I felt like in the moment, like early morning where you're in that like twilight sleep. I felt like that was the place I was in at that moment. The it was it was the it was kind of a crossover between deep sleep. I mean, because I wasn't in a deep sleep, but I wasn't fully awake. It was like that in between space.
So maybe like a stage 1 or stage 2. That's like the low levels of sleep. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
I love the message either way, and I'm guessing it provided you said some comfort to hear that and to see your son. What did he look like? Was he the age he was when he died? 19?
You know, I don't recall having it. It wasn't like it was, even though I saw him, I saw him like in the form of light.
Mm.
I saw it more as an energy. It was more of a feeling than something I could describe with my eyes. It was maybe I felt the echo of him, like from a visual perspective. It was his. He was like. And by the way, I'm fumbling because this is hard to put into words, guys. Okay, it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to describe because it was both a feeling and a visual and everything, and it's hard to put in words. I mean, I felt like he was his age, but there was a level. He was his age, 19, but there was something so much deeper to him than his mortal body. I don't know how to describe it.
Well, I think you're doing a good job because you say like it's about it's a dream, which is very difficult in itself. And instead, there's this light, and you said it wasn't really a visual, it was this feeling and
Yeah.
hearing this stuff. And I think that's just amazing. It's amazing you're able to have that experience for you. Have you ever asked your son or his mother if they've ever had a dream of him?
His mother has said no, and his brother, I don't believe it has. And I think now this might be a judgment on my part, guys. So I'm a projection, if you will. I feel as though I've allowed myself to open the door to the other realm much more than my ex or my son, partly because they don't do any type of personal development, self-help, spiritual type of work. So I know she feels a little frustrated because when I share these experiences, I can feel a little bit of her sadness and like, well, why isn't he talking to me? And my feeling is he's talking to everybody. And so I just think it's being open and receptive to it is the key. So I've allowed my channel to be, like my frequency is set. Hey, I'm open to hearing whatever you have to say. And I get messages from him literally on a daily basis. Now, I'd like to share with your group what this is because there's something uniquely specific if you're interested.
Absolutely.
So my son's nickname was Salty or Salt. And when he passed away, I shared a memorial, like Facebook post with him. And I've had thousands of people write me sharing their, sympathies and condolences and that sort of thing. But I made it public, his nickname, Salty. Ever since then, I've been seeing Salty Crew t-shirts, Salty Life t-shirts. And I mean, Salty is everywhere. And then other people start seeing Salty out there. And I'm talking strangers will take a photograph of someone's t-shirt and send me an instant message through Facebook or post it on their page. I'm talking this happens daily, and this has been over 400 days since he's passed. It happens at least 3 or 4 times a week. And in my world, that's him passing a message on to me, letting me know, hey, he's on my thoughts, or I'm in his thoughts, or something. And so, hey, this could be a total rationalization on my part, or how I'm choosing to see it is him passing messages. And guys, it happens almost every day, if not every other day.
We hear that a lot here on the podcast, and when I look at that, I see it's a continuing bond for sure, and it's providing you comfort. So, like at the end of the day, I think it's amazing you get that confirmation that he loves you and he's thinking about you, kind of thing, over and over again. Because I think in loss, one of the big issues is the sense of how it affects our own self identity. And
Yeah.
for you to continue to hear these messages, it helps you as a caring father know that he's okay, but you're also that you're still loved. And when you lose a child, I can only assume that your identity is wrapped up in that child. That's why you worry about it so much, right? Like it's
Yeah.
part of you. And when that dies, there is that hole that you have to fill with love, as you're saying. And this stuff helps that and helps you move forward with that. So I think it's great that you're having these experiences and you're using them in a positive way to then help others and talk about this stuff with others as you move forward.
Yes, I thank you. And I share, by the way, I have a very public Facebook page because of my professional life. And because I've shared so much publicly about the experience, and there's a lot more that we couldn't do in this, in a podcast, but that I've shared, I've had so many people reach out to me and say, wow, what you shared made a difference in my life. Just whether it's this story or a different story or something of how you're coping, how you're moving through this. And that's what I feel like I'm here to do, is I'm just here to share how I'm navigating this experience, and if that can help someone else navigate it with maybe a little more ease and grace or acceptance or love or compassion, that's what I'm here to do. I'm not here to sell someone on some big gigantic coaching program so I can make a bunch of money and fly in a jet. I just want people to have less suffering in their life, because if every human has less suffering, we all benefit from that.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And first of all, I'm glad you shared your loss online to your followers. I think, and your experiences, because it helps raise awareness and normalize the grief experience. And because in
Yeah.
our culture, we tend not to talk about it too much, especially on social media. So thank you for doing that, because it just allows people to feel like what they experience is normal too, and to help them out through their suffering. So I'd like to thank you for that. And the other thing I wanted to sort of share too was you talked about a little bit about the dreams and what you felt helps predict having dreams versus like other people who don't. And I actually did a research project on that for my PhD. And what was
Hmm.
interesting was it wasn't spirituality that did it, or it wasn't like anything else. The main predictor was the amount of dreams people usually recall in general. And so what it really was saying is that people who recall more dreams tend to remember these types of dreams more often. And so it's
Hmm.
really about dream recall than anything else. And so I think, so what it's saying to me is that a lot of people are probably dreaming of the deceased, they're just not remembering it. And that's okay. And there's ways to improve that. But I think it's interesting how you said your son hasn't had one, and neither has his mother. And so, like, I wonder if it's that. I wonder if they're just not dreaming um, as frequent as maybe you are. That's doing it. And I'm guessing too, you have to be open to it, as you're saying, open to wanting that kind of a
Yeah.
dream.
You brought up something that I'd love to share, and that is, I actually, before I go to bed, I set an intention, go, hey, I want to remember my dream when I wake up. Like, I actually say that to myself before I go to bed.
Oh,
I I create an intention of, or just asking God or universe, help me remember my dream. And and by just even setting that intention, I find I'm a little bit more attuned. A lot of people would say immediately write down your dreams. And I mean, I do believe there is a way to tap into it if we set the intention and really devote from a conscious perspective to honing that skill of remembering the dream. I do believe that's possible. I think it wasn't Freud, it was the other guy who
Young?
specialized in it. I can't. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, he was like he could remember. Like he. So there's probably. I think if we really choose to want to go down that road, and I do it peripherally, guys. I mean, I don't do it that much, and partly I'm okay now with Connor being passed, so I don't feel like I have to tap into him anymore like I used to. Um, for for me to, because I'm in a place of acceptance. I'm in full acceptance. Does it hurt at times? Absolutely. Do I miss him? Absolutely. But I'm in full acceptance. And so I want to try to taste and experience other things in life, and I will ask him for help. Like I'll reach out to him I just say it, I'll just ask him for advice all the time. But I don't necessarily am setting as much intentions around the dreams as I used to. But I will tell you, I do say, hey, help me remember my dream when I wake up. Just setting that intention.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was just picking up on one thing you said, that I don't, you don't need to think about him again, or you don't need him to
Oh,
visit you necessarily.
well, I guess, okay, and let me clarify that. I felt as though when I had those visitations from him, at first, the first one kind of came out of the blue when he says, I'm ready to talk. And then I set some intentions to kind of tap into it through deep meditative sleep and really going deep into relaxation. I don't feel the need to do that as
Yes,
frequently,
yes.
is maybe a better way to put it.
Yeah, and
I don't like, it's not, I don't go to bed thinking, oh, I have to connect with Connor. I don't
mhm.
say it as an intentional thing, because I felt like I got a lot of nourishment out of what happened. But if I choose to do it, I could go and do it whenever I want. I do believe I could do that.
Yeah, that's very interesting to me, because I have heard things like that before. And Joshua, you can step in. But I think that when people get some of these grief dreams, it's and if it's especially if it's positive, sometimes it quenches that thirst and it gives you what you
Mm,
need moving forward, and it
yeah.
might even almost improve in significance. And then I think I've heard people say that, I got the dream, I don't necessarily need another one or something. And I think that's what it is. It adds to that relationship, it grows, and it gives you what you need moving forward, which is amazing.
I'll tell you what just came up for me as you said that, and I think you nailed it, because I didn't give it really I didn't have any awareness around this till just now. In a way, when I had that deep visitation from him, it was almost like a closure piece. Like when my mom passed, I got to say goodbye to her, before the morphine took over. We got to say our goodbyes. In a way, not that there was a goodbye, it was when Connor and I had this connection, but there's an almost feeling of closure that I believe I experienced. Because ever since then, in the 3 or 4 months since that deep visitation, I've been more at peace ever since. And but by the way, I went through the 1 year anniversary of his passing, and that day I was really kind of a wreck for a couple of days. But I'd say I've been really at a fair amount of peace, because maybe what that represented was closure. I don't know. I'm saying that as a hypothesis, not as a fact. Okay.
No, that's actually what happened with my dad. He died very suddenly and unexpected, and
Okay.
I had a dream. I was able to say goodbye to him, and that I loved him, and that
Hmm.
provided. And when I woke up, my grief was changed. Like I wasn't in that deep sorrow that I was prior to bed. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I definitely understand and get what you're saying. Is it changes something inside. Those last words, or just seeing them one more time, and it helped with the grief process in many ways, which
Yeah.
what you're saying is acceptance is the hardest thing, and this is like surrender to what is and what just happened, and
Yeah.
not fight it, but just you see it, and then you said you go into the gratitude of what you've experienced, but to really sit with that, and to accept it all. It is a process, and these experiences or visions definitely can help us out get to that place, because it is a difficult place to get to on your own.
Yeah. The one thing I've come out of this is just a greater level of gratitude, for life. I think, you know, loss really puts things in perspective. And that's the biggest gift I got from his passing, was now choosing to live life more from a place of gratitude, more from a place of appreciation, and doing my best not to take any day for granted, and to recognize that whenever I have friction in my life, it's usually because I'm not in the loving. I'm not either loving myself or I'm not loving people. And if there's a message I could share with everyone, is that was the gift I got, was a better understanding of loving myself and others. And by the way, every morning I say it 100 times. I'm here to love myself and others. I say it every morning when I'm making my bed and making my coffee. I repeat that 100 times. And because that is what brings me the most peace.
That's beautiful. No, it really is. And it's interesting because you got to continue to work at it. Even though you love yourself, there's everything around you that's almost trying to get you to hate yourself, to be a better consumer and everything. And so you have to remind yourself every day. And actually, that's one reason I personally, I don't say that as frequently as you do. But what I do is I try to wear red, and red symbolizes that to me, is to remember to love myself. And so it's like my own little thing, my own mantra almost, as I wake up in the morning, to start it off right, and to then be able to pass that love on to others who are suffering as you cross paths. So, I think it's great what you're doing and the journey you've on. Like, thank you for being so honest with everything you've dealt with through the coping, the struggles, living with your parents. A lot of people could probably relate to that. And then also where you've come now. And so I'm guessing, do you still live with your dad or no?
Oh, no. No, I got my own place about, let's see, it's been over 6 or 7 years. No, because when I actually built a successful dating coaching business, I'm actually overlooking the ocean right now and have a great ocean view.
That's amazing.
My father actually, real quickly, because remember you said I lost my mother, my son. My father moved back to his home country. Both my parents were from Istanbul, Turkey. So my father moved back at age 93. He's now 94. Because he wants to die in the country he was born. So I may never see my father again. I mean, I do plan on going, but he's 94 and anything could happen. But I lost 3 significant people in my life, literally. And I'll share, the reason why I'm sharing this with you is I had to really come to the realization that my mother and father represented my rock on some level. They represented anchor. And my son represented my responsibility of protecting what was mine, if you will. In other words, a piece of my flesh. And what I've kind of come to realize is that I'd always given my power away. In other words, my mom and dad are here to protect me. I'm here to protect my son. And what I gleaned from this now is to recognize it's not about protecting myself or being protected. It's about nourishing my own soul. And so I've been on a journey of, when I say self-discovery, it's really my own sovereignty, my own awareness, and feeling complete as a person, and being able to give to others and receive from others. But and that's why I wrote the book, What the Heck is Self-Love? Because like when you're getting on the airplane, they tell you about the oxygen mask is to put it on yourself first. That's what I'm learning in this experience of life, is how to put the oxygen mask on myself. And I just want to encourage others to do the same.
That's a great example. I like that, because what they say is, you can't take care of your child or the person next to you unless you yourself put on your mask. And that's a perfect analogy for self-love, because, if you don't love yourself, it's very difficult for you to then extend that love to others and those around you.
Yeah.
Our last question we like to ask on a podcast is, if you could have a dream tonight of someone who's passed away, who would that be, and what would that dream look like?
Wow. I wasn't expecting this. So, do you know the first thing that came to my mind? I know this sounds crazy. Well, not crazy, but I'd love to have a conversation with Jesus.
Wow.
And because, and let me share with you why. And I'm not a religious person, but Jesus to me represented what love was like in human form. Like just being, what he represents to me is empathy, compassion, and even he represented a fierce warrior inside of him because he was very strong in his convictions. Oh God, there's one other person now that popped in my head to piggyback from him. And the second, can I bring up two?
Of course, yes.
So the next incarnation of Jesus to me was Mr. Rogers. And there's a new movie out about him, but Mr. Rogers represents that to me as well, as an absolute incarnation of being a giver of love without expecting anything in return. So if I could have two dreams, it would be them, because this is kind of the path I want. This is where I feel drawn to move towards. How can I give love? How can I be an extension of love? How can I both love myself and others in that capacity? So I'd want to have a three-way conference call like the three of us with those two guys.
I like that. I like that imagery. You're at your desk or whatever, at your home, and you're having this on your internet, and then two things pop up for your video conference. You have Jesus on one end and Mr. Rogers on the other. That's pretty cool. And what's interesting about you picking Jesus was the oxygen mask thing, because he mentions that in the scriptures, how like he was saying, you got to take the log out of your own eye before you can help someone take the log out of theirs. And that's exactly what you're saying. Is you gotta, you gotta work on yourself first so you can help those around you. And so what a cool dream. Never would have expected you to say that. But and I just actually watched that Mr. Rogers documentary. It's really amazing.
Yeah, it really is. And if there's something about the humanity of Mr. Rogers and the absolute pure place of love he came from. And so, thank you. I'm sorry. I could talk about that for a next hour.
What question would you ask them?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't. This came to my head. How did you do it? Like, and I mean to say is, how did you shift from your ego to love? How did you shift from fear to love? Like, in other words, and I don't know what they'd say, but I just, how did you do it? How did you let go of your ego and fear, and how did you tap into love?
Yeah, hey, that's my opinion, one of the biggest challenges in life.
Yeah.
And I think that you can literally ask Jesus, what would you do in the dream?
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to have a bracelet, don't have to pose a question in reality. And again, it's creative, and it's something that you can play with, and I love that.
Yeah.
Well, Jonathan, has been amazing, and again, a lot of great information, a lot of cool. We had a really good conversation on various topics, and so many things that to absorb and to bring up, and even just when you were talking about humble moments and incorporating self-love and reevaluating yourself first before you go out into the world and say, well, what's wrong with that other person? Well, what's wrong with me? And how can I fix myself first? Which is, these are all really great tips for men and women, whether they're dating or even, going through the grief process and all that they can really incorporate into their lives. Could you share with us anywhere where people can reach you and find your books?
Oh, great. Thank you. So, again, my name is Jonathon Aslay, last name spelled Aslay. My website, jonathanaslay.com. Also, if you type in selflovethebook.com, that takes you straight to Amazon, where my book, What the Heck is Self-Love Anyway, is for sale. And actually, just Google my name. I've got a YouTube channel where I shoot videos on a regular basis. I have a membership program for predominantly women who want to improve their love life, called Midlife Love Mastery. So just Google my name, and I'm sure a gazillion things come up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for giving us that out. And listeners, check him out and see if you can check out his website and enjoy his books and get some knowledge on that.
I got a question. If someone's under 40, do you still help them out, or is it only people who are over 40?
No, actually, interesting enough, I've been getting more people under 40, and I'm actually, and let me just say this to your audience, I so want to help people before they hit 50, 60, and above. Like, the sooner one begins a journey of self-love, I believe the happier their life is. So yes, I will work with people below 40. I just happen to talk to that demographic because my background has been divorce, which is alimony, child support, visitation rights, all the emotional traumas that happen. So I can talk into it better, but no, I love to talk to younger people because get started on a personal development path sooner rather than later.
Excellent. All right. So please check out our platform at griefdreams.ca for more information on the topic. We added a donation button, and there are perks to those who donate. If you have Facebook, you can join the Grief Dreams group. You can share your dreams or hear more dreams of others. We are on Twitter and Instagram at Grief Dreams and at the Grief Dreams podcast. So check those out. And as well, if you have a chance, please rate us on iTunes. With love and gratitude from us to you.
I have questions. I have introduced myself. You have introduced yourself. This is a very good conversation.